Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Wendy Byard, who's here to share with us her new novel, Devil in the Dunes. What happens when a small town serenity is shattered by a chilling disappearance and secrets refuse to stay hidden? Well, today's guest is here to dive into just that. Devil in the Dunes is Wendy Byard's newly released page-turning suspense novel, already installed in the prestigious Library of Michigan. A newspaper columnist and former journalist and marketing pro, Wendy Byard brings decades of insight into human nature and a knack for a compelling story to her fictional work. So welcome to the show, Wendy Byard.
Well, thank you, Marianne. I'm excited to be here.
Well, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book, Devil in the Dunes. For those who have not read it, can you give us a little snapshot without any spoilers?
I know. I don't want to give the finale away. Well, really what you have is a young woman, Katie McLeod. She's 18 years old. She's beautiful, talented, has a full ride to run track at Michigan State University. But it's the end of the senior year bonfire. And it's midnight, and the moon is out, and the fire's dying. And so she goes into the sand dunes to leave, get her bike, ride home, and she disappears. But it's not a random night. 6 years earlier, on the very night that she goes missing, her parents were murdered. They were walking down Coastal Highway 22, hand in hand, going to get an ice cream, and then they're run down by a supposed drunk driver who's never caught. And so now 6 years later, to the very night, their only daughter goes missing. So it's a crime story. It's a mystery whodunit. It's a page turner because everybody wants to know what happened to Katie. Is she going to be okay? Who killed her parents and why? Are they connected? So it's a good suspenseful page turner, I would say.
Well, it most definitely is. And I have to ask, so what inspired you to write a suspense story set on the West Michigan coastline there?
Well, I've always loved mysteries. When I was a little girl in middle school, I used to sneak out of class to read Nancy Drew. And she was kind of my first, literary feminist. And throughout my life, I've always loved a good mystery because I like to, figure out who did it. Is there going to be justice at the end, following the clues and the evidence? And so I thought I would like to write a crime story, but not a simplistic crime story. I wanted to have a great plot, of course, but I really wanted to have characters that you could care about. I wanted there to be deeper themes. So, for example, Katie McLeod, she kind of is a modern take on Nancy Drew, being that she's calm and cool and clever. And, she's kidnapped, so she has to use her wiles to free herself. And readers need to find out, did she? How did she do it? And the themes. I have a villain, the weirdo. We don't know his mysterious reasons, but he is somebody that people are going to find very eerie and intriguing. So characters and yeah, the Michigan setting. Well, I love Michigan. I live here. I grew up here, and I vacation on the west side of Michigan many times. My daughter actually got married up near Traverse City. And I always thought it would make such a great setting for a novel, even a crime story, because you have everything. First of all, you have beautiful beaches, and you've got towering cliffs and sand dunes. You have quaint little coastal towns, like Frankfort and Leland. But then you've got storms. You've got raging storms. Lake Michigan is the fifth largest lake in the world. So I just thought, it's going to be a perfect location. And the people in Michigan, of course, love that.
I bet they do. Are there places that they can say, "Oh, I've been there," as they're reading the book?
Oh, definitely. It's situated in the fictional Harbor Cove, which is actually Frankfort, Michigan. And in the very first chapter, I mentioned the Port Betsy Lighthouse. And that is the lighthouse that's there at Frankfort. And there's a marina. So anybody that, reads the book, they're probably going to pretty quickly figure out that it's the Frankfort, Michigan area. And Frankfort is just a lovely, quaint, beautiful little town. But then the story kind of transports readers up the coast. So it goes to Leland or Fishtown, which is a historic town that kind of juts out into Lake Michigan. It goes to Traverse City, where there's an FBI office. And it also, I was really going to try to do this with my book, and I pulled it off. I wanted it to go to Mackinac Island because I was married there. And I thought somehow I'm going to get Katie McLeod and her love interest, Nick, up to Mackinac Island and the Grand Hotel. So through some problem solving, I figured it out, and I got it there.
That's so exciting. And I know so many people like to read books where they're like, ooh, maybe this is where I'm at right now and how this is all coming together. It kind of add like a layer of suspense to it.
Well, I think a lot of people really do like crime stories and mysteries. They're very engrossing. They kind of take you out of your everyday life. And then you really start to care about the characters. You want to know what's going to happen to Katie McLeod. Is she going to survive this? Why was she kidnapped? And then I've got characters like Detective Jake Brennan. He's a hero. He rescued a bunch of children from a bus fire, but one little girl was unconscious and he didn't see her. So he's tormented because of her death. So he's looking for redemption. You got Dana Baker, the police sergeant, who doesn't have much of a social life and her husband left her. So you have a lot of characters to really care about that pull you in, but the plot is pretty good. I'm going to say there's no way you can figure out the ending. There is not one person that has figured out the finale. It will, and it's not a cheat. It's not unbelievable, unreasonable. It's very satisfying, but it's no way that you can figure out the ending. So I love that.
Oh, those are always such great books to read. And earlier you mentioned themes. Are there a couple main themes that run throughout the book that you can share with us?
Well, there are. I mean, the main themes on one side are hurt, hatred, betrayal, and vengeance. And how does a person react when faced with situations? We all have choices to make in our lives as to how we're going to react to the things that happen to us. But then on the other side, there is hope and there's love and there is redemption and there's heroics. I have a scene off Lake Michigan. It's off North Manitou Island during a raging storm where there's really kind of a fight to the death on a mini yacht. And so, you see both kind of pitted against each other. What does hatred and vengeance do to a person and a whole community? But on the other side, how does the community respond? How do individuals respond? Love and caring and hope and bravery and not giving up, persevering. So again, I didn't want to write a simplistic crime story. I wanted something that had some depth. So when you were done reading it, not only did you read a good story, a great plot, you were engrossed in it, and you liked the characters and all of that. But I wanted you to come away with it, thinking about it, thinking about this person, the weirdo, thinking about the choices we make and the consequences of them. But what could we do? What is the right way to go about living life?
Well, I found it was so interesting how you opened the novel with this devastating murders, and you talked about that of Katie's parents. How did you approach
Right.
writing such a powerful and shocking beginning?
Well, this is really funny. So when I was 17 years old, I read Jaws by Peter Benchley, which I loved. In fact, I just saw Jaws at the movie theater because it's the 50th anniversary of Jaws. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh my goodness, if I ever wrote a novel, I was going to start it like Peter Benchley's Jaws. In his book, you've got a young couple. It's dark. They're down on the beach, which is always an eerie setting. It's isolated. It's mysterious. The waves are lapping against the shore, and nobody's around. And so I did the same thing with my opening. I have a young woman, Katie McLeod. She's being watched by somebody further into the dunes. She's enjoying herself. It's an end of high school bonfire, and that's how Peter Benchley's book starts out. Of course, you have young people around a bonfire that's crackling into the night sky. So yeah, I got a lot of inspiration from that, and it's funny when I give author talks, I always have my copy of Jaws with me, and I read the first paragraph, and I'll ask people, do you know what book this is from? And nobody knows, but when I start to tell them, I just usually go doo 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 doo, and then everybody knows. But yeah, it was just inspiring to me, and I think it's a great way to start. I mean, it really starts right with the abduction, the kidnapping off the Lake Michigan beach.
Earlier, you mentioned that Katie is a little bit similar to the Nancy Drew type of personality. So, what qualities did you want Katie to embody and why?
Well, like I said, I first got introduced to Nancy Drew when I was in middle school, and I think she was really an inspiring character. She was always like the smartest person in the room, even when she was with adults. She, was always kind of clever, and she didn't get ruffled easily. She had a logical mind, a kind of a scientific mind, but she had a playful side. But and then of course, I think she could speak Italian. She was driving her dad's convertible, but she just she was like somebody like you could look up to as a young girl. And I read most all of her books, when I was a little girl. And so later in life, I think when you read things throughout your life, they become a part of you. So when you sit down to write, you don't necessarily know what you're going to write, how it's all going to come out, what you're drawing on, from your own life. But when I realized what I was doing, that I was fashioning this young woman after Nancy Drew, I think she's an empowered female protagonist. To be honest, throughout my life, I've read so many crime stories, mysteries, where women are abducted, they're raped, they're battered, they're killed, and then somebody else is doing the solving of the case, and then the victim's voice or their agency is gone. And so I said to myself, I would really like to read a crime story where the woman is an equal match for the villain, and let's see who wins. And I went to Michigan State University, so of course, I have to have Katie going there, and I ran track in high school, so she's running the hurdles. But she is somebody I think that a lot of people will look up to, and a lot of younger people are reading my book. 18, 19-year-olds, and I think a lot of them really do appreciate seeing a female character in a book who, is clever, who is calm under pressure and fights for her life.
So, Lake Michigan, my goodness, what a great backdrop. What role does the lake play in the landscape in heightening the
Mm.
sense of suspense and mood in the story?
Well, if you haven't gone to Lake Michigan, which I said is the fifth largest lake in the world, it can play so many characters. I mean, it's almost like it is a character. When it's a calm day, it's beautiful. It's turquoise. It looks like the Mediterranean. It adds a peaceful feeling. All is right with the world. Really, it's kind of symbolic, actually. But then there are times where the clouds come in, a storm rages. In the end of my novel, there's 12-foot waves. The boat, is taking on water. I don't want to give too much away. But, the lake is always present. Everyone always wants to look at it. They want to be near it. But it's very powerful. It's got strong riptides. So it's to be taken seriously. So really, it's a great device in the novel because it can be all these things. It can be everything from being serene. For example, I have one character. He's up on the Empire Bluffs, and he's looking out, this panoramic view of Lake Michigan where you can see, sand dunes and cliffs. And he's looking out, considering if he's going to kill himself or not. But yet the lake is still serene and beautiful. So sometimes it can be at odds with what's going on, and that's interesting too.
At the beginning of our discussion, you mentioned that Devil in the Dunes blends the kind of elements of whodunit with a psychological thriller. How did you
hmm
weave these two elements together?
The psychological part, a lot of it is the villain. I think in today's world, we do have men sometimes that are angry at women. I probably wove a little bit of Brian Koberger, the young man that murdered the four students in Idaho, a little bit into my character, I guess. Trying to get to the bottom of, why do people do what they do? Why, rather than seeking therapy or getting support or just doing something different, they go down that dark path, and they have low self-esteem. They're trying to get power for themselves. And so the psychological part, for him is quite interesting. For Katie McLeod, she lost her parents when she was 12 years old. They were killed by a drunk driver. So she's growing up with her Aunt Marie. And in the beginning of the novel, I tell the story of the sand dunes. It's an Ojibwe, Indian story. And, that's an important element for Katie, her psychological stance, because she's missing her parents. She wants to find them. She's going to Michigan State to become a forensic scientist to solve this. So she's somebody that's, all of the characters really have a burden on them. They're all struggling. It doesn't matter if it's the villain. It doesn't matter if it's Katie McLeod, who, had to grow up fast, and wants to avenge her parents' death and get to the bottom of it, and grappling, with going forward as a young woman. And there's even a scene where, I don't want to give away where she's being held. I will say this: there are some situations in my novel that you will never read anywhere else, and you have never read it, and you won't ever read it. And so to see where she's imprisoned and how she responds, to being isolated, and at one point she's thinking about giving up, and she looks up to, I don't want to give too much away, but she looks up and she sees this horned owl, which her father loved owls, and she's questioning, do I just let go? Is it easier to just let yourself go and die and be with my parents? What do they want for me? What do I want for myself? So she has, these struggles, like I would imagine when somebody loses their parents.
I'm sure you did a lot of research for this book, especially when we talk about like, diving into the mind of a sociopath. Is
hmm
there any part of that you can share with us? I'm sure it was pretty intense.
Well, like I said, throughout my life, I've read so many crime stories. I've watched so many datelines and forensic files. I even allude to that in the book. I have Katie and her Aunt Marie being big fans of crime stories, just like me. So, and I'm always intrigued by the crimes in our society. Why are people doing what they're doing? What is their background? Kind of like, Mindhunter profiling, these people, so that we can get, a better understanding of them. Really drawing on all my life's experiences, all the movies I've watched, all the books I've read. And then, of course, then you dig into, what is a narcissistic sociopath? What are the traits, of this individual? What are their symptoms? Why did they end up this way? So you have to do a lot of research into that. And then there's all the research of the location. I mean, you want it to be very accurate. So, like, for example, if you're riding along Lake Michigan in June, driving up coastal M22, what kind of trees are rushing by? What kind of flowers are in bloom? What does Lake Michigan smell like at that time of year? What do, the Empire cliffs look like? In Leland, Fishtown, there's a farm up in Leland, the Kessler brothers, who actually, that's a very intriguing chapter. That's one of those chapters you'll never read anything like that, I promise. And then there's the research of what happens when a young woman goes missing from, next to Lake Michigan, the Coast Guard coming in, the state police, the canine unit, a pedestrian search, bringing in, the FBI from Traverse City. So there's different levels of research, into the minds of people. And I think I've always been kind of good with psychology. I was a college teacher for over 20 years. I was a high school teacher. I have interacted very deeply with lots of people over the years. And some of my students, we would be writing like a memoir, like an essay. And many of my students have a lot of serious problems in their life that I was kind of mentoring them. So you're a little bit of a social worker and a resource person to these young people. And so that kind of, it provides that to you.
There's so many layers there, and it has me kind of thinking, was this based off of any type of true story? Because it seems so real.
Well, I'll tell you really quickly how this came to me. It's kind of crazy. This was several years ago, And my family and I, we were driving south on I-65. It was spring break. We were all going to Panama for a softball tournament. My daughters played softball. And I'm driving, and it's before dawn, so it's dark. Everyone's asleep, and I'm not listening to the radio for some reason. I wasn't listening to anything. And so for like 4 hours, I was driving, and all of a sudden, my mind just started imagining. It was just coming to me, and I started filling the plot in. I started thinking about how it would begin. I started thinking about, well, what's the twist at the end? And so finally, when dawn, arrived and the sun came up, I was going over the Ohio River, driving into St. Louis, Kentucky, and everyone in the car is groggy. And I said, "Guess what? Mom just wrote a novel." And everyone just looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Wow! In these past 4 hours, I created a novel." But I set it aside because I was busy. I was a college professor. I was on the school board. I was raising 3 daughters. I just didn't have the mental space, the time. And I had self-doubts. Can I write this book? Am I smart enough, talented enough? So I put it on the back burner. And I don't, to be honest, didn't know if I would ever write it. But this is kind of an interesting story. Last spring break, I was down in Florida with my in-laws. And my father-in-law, Jerry, and I are both big Michael Connelly fans. So we're both reading a Michael Connelly book. And I say, Jerry, I've always had an idea for a plot, for a novel, a whodunit. And he's a retired engineer, very pragmatic. And he's like, "Well, why aren't you writing it? You should be writing it." And I said, that's like climbing the mountain. Can I do it? Am I talented enough? I don't want to be embarrassed. You have to be vulnerable, when you're writing a book. I don't want to quit halfway through and then be a quitter for my family. And then he said something that really struck me. He said, "Well, when you go back home to Michigan, all you have to do is write one chapter. Just sit down and write one chapter. You're going to pretty quickly know if you like it, if you're any good at it." And I said, "Jerry, I can definitely do that." So I went home, and for a week, it was like an anxiety, like, "Oh my gosh, I have to start this." And it wasn't like a pleasant feeling, but finally one night, the house was quiet. My husband went to bed early. I turned on a little light by my computer, and I start writing, that very first chapter, the weirdo. And the very first line is, "I see you." And I was hooked. I absolutely fell in love with my own story. And I needed to know what was going to happen to all these characters. Because, sometimes when you're writing, it's organic. It's coming out of you. You're imagining it. And you don't always know what your brain is going to give you.
That's so exciting. I mean, it sounds
Mm.
like there's a part of this process that was a little surprising. Did that carry all the way down to the end?
It really did. People will ask me, well, because it's funny, as a teacher, I would, talk about, creating outlines. And of course, I had a basic outline. But I really like the fact that it was organic because I didn't always know where everything was going to go. And I have told people writing something like this is like problem solving all the time because it's like, what's going to happen next? What suspect is going to be introduced? What kind of evidence might make us think that this is the weirdo? You're researching, the location that you're in. You're having to do all of this. So, it's a very interesting process. I kind of liken it to like when you're in the flow, doing something you love to do, and time kind of stands still, like hours go by. Literally, sometimes I would wake up in the morning, I would brush my teeth, but I would sit down at the computer because I was so excited to write. And I would be there till like just before my husband came home from work. I'd like run and get in the shower so I didn't think I was sitting there all day, but I was. But you get drawn into your own story, and your brain is creating this for you. And sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and put a note in my phone, or I would be driving and I would record myself because my mind was always thinking, trying to solve little problems. What's going to happen to this character, or what do I do to make this happen? It's all this problem solving, but it's so satisfying, when you figure it out and it makes sense and it's thrilling, or it's a cliffhanger. So it's challenging. It's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it's also so rewarding. I mean, it's something I'll always be proud of.
Well, Wendy, where can our listeners connect with you, learn more about Devil in the Dunes, and be part of your community?
Yeah, well, I do have my website. It's Wendy Byard wendybyard.com, so WendyByard, author.com. Of course, I'm on Instagram, just under my name, Wendy Byard. And, the book is for sale, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Ingram Spark, a lot of, distributors throughout the country. And I've really been concentrating, since it just got released this year, on the West Coast of Michigan. I've had a lot of great book signings up and down the West Coast. I've been in Traverse City. I have been up in Leland, Fishtown, Manistee. I kicked off the summer author series down in Grand Haven. So I've really been concentrating on getting the book first out to Michiganders. And one thing I'm really proud of, in Michigan, we have something called Michigan Notable Books, and they choose 20 notable books every year that are written by a Michigan author or about Michigan. And they don't announce it till December. They get about 300 submissions. But I have discovered that my book at least is installed in the Michigan Library of Michigan, our state's capital. So I'm really hoping that I can be one of those 20 notable books come December. But it is a long shot. But I'm proud that a panel of people judged my work of quality enough to install it into the Library of Michigan.
Well, Wendy, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, thank you, Marianne. It's been a real pleasure. It's very fun to talk about your own book, so thanks for indulging me.
Well, thank you, Wendy. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new novel, Devil in the Dunes. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.